Hello, everybody. It's Jon Zagrodzky, First Selectman for the Town of Darien. It is Sunday evening, October 19th, 2025. The topic of my video today is to talk about the proposed acquisition by the town of the Koons Parking Lot. So this is a lot well known to everyone. It's the commuter parking lot that's located at the intersection of West Avenue and Leroy Avenue. And it has been owned by the family for many, many years, and they have decided that they would like to sell it. And so my purpose today is to go through what the town has been doing to get to the point where we might acquire this property and hopefully lay out some facts and information that will help those of you who are in decision-making roles on this, get your mind around everything that we've been looking at, and hopefully this video will answer many of your questions. So my topics are to take a look at the history of the lot and how it works today. I'd also like to go through our acquisition process and our rationale for acquiring the property. We'll go through some numbers about volume and revenue. We'll talk about some due diligence topics, as well as, of course, the purchase and sale agreement, as well as the negotiated price. And I'll wrap up with an approval timeline and a look ahead at our near and medium term planning. So let's get started with history and how this lot works today. So here is an image from the Darien Historical Society. This is an aerial shot taken of Darien. We think it's from the late 1940s. And this is all before the interstate went through. So you can see the Post Road, the Darien Railroad Station, West Avenue, Leroy Avenue, and Tokenique Road going up there towards the left, all before Interstate 95 came through. Kip's Lot is there in the red dashed area. And that's a rough image of where it is, and you can see it sitting right there at Leroy and West Avenue. As far as we can tell from a search of public records and based on my conversations with Kip, it looks like it's been used as a parking lot and only as a parking lot since the late 1940s or early 1950s. In addition, there are no records of any buildings on site except for the guard or ticket shack, which sits there today. So here's a map that I prepared to show the different parcels that make up the Kip's Lot, and I'll give you a little history on how all this came together. So you'll see down there at the bottom, there's two parcels, one in blue and one in red. Those parcels were purchased by Charles A. Koons and Company. That's Kip's father. And they were purchased in the early 1950s from the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad Company. The railroad decided that they didn't need those properties anymore, and so the Koons family purchased them, one in 53 for $7,000 and then the smaller sliver for $3,000 the next year. The idea at the time was that that would be a future site for the Town of Darien post office. It never came together and never got located there, but that was the intention of buying those properties, was to hopefully attract the post office to be there. The larger green piece of property there, or green parcel there that you see, was actually owned by a man named Nicholas Florentine. And in 1954, the Koons family leased that piece of property from Mr. Florentine. It was really at that time that the property all started to be used for a parking lot, all of the acquired parcels that you see there. But the family did eventually purchase the property from Mr. Florentine in 1963 for a sum of $40,000. So today, the Koons Lot actually encompasses all three of these properties, and they are all owned jointly by the family through their LLC called West Avenue LLC. So in terms of how the property operates today, as I said, it is strictly a commuter parking lot. Commuters can pay cash or check. They don't accept credit cards, and either pay the attendant directly when you arrive, or via an envelope, which you can leave in a drop box. And here's what the envelope looks like. You're also able to get parking in advance. So you can pay a monthly or quarterly rate here, which you pay in advance. And that allows you to park at a slightly cheaper rate than if you were to park on a daily basis. Currently, the parking lot attendant, very nice man named Bob DeRoma, I went over and met with him. He is the attendant, and he works Monday through Thursday from about 5:30 in the morning until about 12 noon. Kip himself is covering on Fridays. In speaking with Bob, he and the families talked to him as well. He's agreed to stay on until we can transition the parking lot from what it is now into the town's payment app, as well as the kiosks for payment that you see on the train platforms. And so we'll have an attendant in place until we can get all of that sorted out. So next up, let's talk a little bit about the acquisition process, and I'll go through some details here. First, in terms of the process, so I was first approached by Kip about selling the lot back in March of this year. He and I sat down at lunch, and he talked about his siblings having an interest in going ahead and selling the lot, and he expressed a strong desire to sell the lot to the town rather than to a developer. So we started discussions in earnest on this in June. The town engaged our town council, Curtis Brinkerhoff, to help us with this, and the Koons family engaged their own attorney. And the work streams were as follows. We certainly did a strategic and financial analysis of all of this, thinking through our rationale for the acquisition, but also looking at the numbers in terms of lot volume, revenue, and then how we would actually manage this lot going forward. The town also hired Karen and Fazio. They've done a lot of appraisal work for us in the past to conduct an appraisal for the property. We hired Redness and Mead to do a new property and topographic survey. We had town council to conduct a thorough title search. We had an environmental review done by Geo Environmental. And then, of course, we drafted the purchase agreement itself. We began price negotiations in September, and I signed the purchase and sale agreement for $5,130,000 earlier this month on October 3rd. So then the question is why would we acquire this property? Well, the first thing to note is that given that the Koons family had decided to sell it, they're obviously going to sell the property for what's called highest and best use. And that's another way of saying for the most money that someone would pay for it. And in this case, the highest and best use for that property is actually not a cash parking lot. It's multifamily housing. You build housing there, that property is going to be worth a lot more money than just having it as a parking lot as it is today. And so acquiring this property really gives us control over that future use. So if a developer were to come in and buy the property, they're going to develop housing on that property. But if the town acquires it, that means we have control over the future use for this property, which we would lose if a developer bought it. And by having that control, it gives us lots of options. And in fact, there are a lot of parking options we could consider. One of them is to just continue as a surface lot. We could keep it as daily parking, or we could actually go to full or partial permit parking like we have in some other lots. We could even consider in the future a parking garage where we might have space not just for commuters, but also for downtown retail employees, which would free up a lot of parking near our retail establishments in the central business area. Some people have talked about whether we might actually, as a town, develop the property into what's called transit-oriented development, which are multifamily housing next to train stations and bus stations. My general view is that that might be possible well into the future, but it's highly unlikely. The fact is we need parking, and I think it would probably be a mistake to develop the property into housing. We need this for parking, and so I'm pretty motivated to make sure we acquire this property, which will preserve our right to keep it as parking. One thing to point out is that by owning the town, or having the town ownership of this lot, it does permit us to restrict parking to town residents if we decide to do that in the future. There are no plans to do that now. I just wanted to point out that it is, in fact, possible to do that. So let's glance through some of the numbers here. What you see here is a chart that shows all of the town and state lots in Darien and the total amount of parking that we have. So across all lots, it's about 1,998, call it 2,000 spaces that we have for parking here in this town. About 45% of that total capacity is owned by the town. It's on lots that we own. But that means the other 55%, which are some pretty big lots that you see here, they're actually owned by the Connecticut Department of Transportation. We're able to park on those lots, but the state owns those lots, not the town of Darien. So the Koons Lot has about 293 spaces. And it's important to note that if a developer bought that and turned it into multifamily housing, we would lose that parking, and it would reduce our overall parking in town, total capacity for parking, by about 15%. And that's an awful lot of parking to lose. So here's a chart that shows the annual car volume for the Koons Lot. So you can see there for 2016 through 2019, the average was in the low 50,000 total cars parked in that lot. When COVID hit, of course, the car volume dropped a lot. It probably didn't drop as much as you're seeing here. The reason the numbers dropped like this is that from March of 2020 until the spring of 2022, more than 2 years later, they did not record car volume at all. And there were cars parked, but there was no attendant to count them. And we don't have clear and accurate counts of cars back during that time. So folks began to return to parking in 2023. That year benefited from the closing of the New Canaan rail line for some maintenance. But as you see, even from 23 up through 25, they're forecasting continued improvement in parking volume. And based on observed trends, which was about 35,000 through October 10th, they're forecasting something in the range of 37,000 for total cars parked in the lot for 2025. So a clear improvement. They think that it's based in part on employers changing some of their policies now, which are requiring employees to come back to work and to work sometimes 4 or 5 days a week in the office in New York City. Here's another way to look at volume. This is average daily volume. So take any Monday over the course of the year. What I did in this chart is you take all the Mondays, for example, in 2023, and you average them, and then you get to the average parking or average number of cars in the lot on those days of the week. So Monday starts off, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday obviously are the strong days. And then Friday, there's still a lot of work from home, and so there's less parking. But what you see from this chart is that daily parking by day, except maybe for Friday, all the other main days, they continue to improve from 2023. For 2025, this chart shows year-to-date data through October 17th, but still gives you a good picture about overall parking trends, which continue to improve. Here's now a look at revenue. And again, same thing, big drop off from the start of COVID after 2019. And the reason that it drops off, of course, is not only was there no attendant to count cars, there was no attendant to collect payments. And what you see here is the lot did still collect some money during that time period, and it was strictly people leaving money in envelopes. So that was great that they still continued to pay for their parking, but it was completely voluntary back then. In terms of today, they did increase prices in the lot, $8 to $10 a day for daily parking, and you can see here for monthly and 3-month parking. Those rates were increased effective January 1st of this year. And so that's why you see the total forecasted revenue of about $347,000. The parking volume was down, or for 2025 will be down about 30% from 2019, but revenue is only down 15%. And again, that reflects the fact that pricing was increased at the first of this year. And you can see down at the bottom of this slide that the average revenue per car for 2024 was $7.48, and with the price increase, that increased to $9.22 for 2025. Okay. Other due diligence items. So the first one to talk about is the appraisal. As I mentioned, Kieran and Fazio did this based on highest and best use. The sales comparison approach was what they used for their appraisal basis, and the valuation of $5,130,000. For a price per acre of $2,554,000. You'll see at the bottom of this chart a number of comparable sales that the appraiser surfaced to try to get to a reasonable comparison. A couple properties here in Darien over on 346 Heights Road that sold March of 23 for $3.6 million per acre, 54 Boston Post Road for $2.5 million an acre. And you can see the other comparables there, but based on their judgment, they think that $2.5 million per acre, again, based on highest and best use, is a fair and reasonable valuation for this property. And that's what they recommended to us, which got us to the total of $5,130,000. The next area of due diligence that we did was a fresh property and topographic survey for the property. So the purpose of doing that is really to confirm that the property value or boundary lines are exactly right, that the total area of the parcel is in fact 2.009 acres, and then to make sure there aren't any zoning regulations where there's non-compliance. And so Redness and Mead did all that work, and they found no issues and did not recommend any further action. So we did do some pretty careful title research, and there were a couple of issues that we found, which I'll go through here briefly. One was the location of a drainage pipe, and you can see here indicated in that with that red line. It was a pipe that was installed back in the 50s and repaired sometime, I think, in 1988. It is currently used for stormwater drainage, but you'll recall that we have the Tilly Pond Flood Project, which is in the design phase right now. When that project is installed, it's going to take over all the drainage, and this old pipe that you see here with that red line, the plan is that the town would abandon that pipe. It will no longer be used once the Tilly Flood Project is completed. Now, the fact that this drainage pipe exists, it's not a legal issue or no right-of-way, or there's no third party that has any rights attached to it. It's just that it's a drainage pipe out there that we're using right now. And as I said before, once it's abandoned in the next couple of years and the Tilly Pond project is finished, we'll be able to remove it for construction problems or construction purposes, and that won't be a problem going forward. So no issues with this drainage pipe. The second thing they discovered was the existence of a right-of-way. And we believe it was created to provide access from the original Koons lots there, the blue and the red properties they acquired from the railroad, to provide access from those properties up to West Avenue. And we don't have any documentation other than a notation on a map that says right-of-way. There's no legal document, there's no official record, nothing that we can find anywhere that says anything more than that. We don't know who has the right-of-way. We don't know anything about it other than the fact that it says right-of-way on a map. Now, town council in researching this believes that that right-of-way, whoever has it, was extinguished when all these lots merged, right? So when the Koons family bought the lot from the Florentines in 1963, all three of these properties, green, blue, and red, all merged into a single property. And because of that, there was really no need for a right-of-way anymore. And that's why town council believes that it was extinguished when that final purchase was made in 1963. But in any case, there is the Connecticut Marketable Record Title Act, which basically says that if you have something like a right-of-way and it has not been enforced in any way, there's been no legal claim and there are no recorded instruments to preserve that right-of-way for 40 years, then that act says that right-of-way or that other aspect of the property title is extinguished. And we believe that applies in this case because no one has in fact stepped forward with regard to the right-of-way, and the Koons family has owned this lot consistently since 1963. So again, we don't think there's any issue with this right-of-way with regard to the town's ownership. I would point out that the title insurance company has carved these two things out, this pipeline as well as this right-of-way, and have declined to insure it. We're going to talk to them about that and see what it would take to go ahead and include it in the policy. But in any case, we're not worried about it because of the facts that I just described about both these issues. So in addition, we did an environmental survey, what's called a phase 1 survey. That was done by GZA Geoenvironmental. They've helped us with a lot of environmental work on Great Island, a very high quality firm. They found no evidence anywhere of any of the following. So you can see here written down, recognized environmental conditions. Those are environmental problems that are either apparent today or have a likelihood of becoming a problem. There was none of that. They looked for controlled REC. So that's an environmental problem that's been recognized. There's been an effort to remediate it to the state's satisfaction, but the problem still exists. And then historical RECs, those are ones where there was a problem in the past, but it was fully remediated. But in any case, they found none of that. None of these issues were surfaced. And you can see the quote there at the bottom, based on the findings of our phase 1 ESA, it is our opinion that no further investigation of the subject property is warranted at this time. So good news from an environmental standpoint. I'll summarize a couple of terms from the purchase and sale agreement here briefly. Obviously, the parties to the agreement are the buyer, Town of Darien, represented by me, and then the seller, West Avenue Parking LLC, the Koons family LLC. The property is 37 West Avenue, and it includes the land improvements, easements, and fixtures. Purchase price of $5,130,000, which matches the appraised value, with a deposit of 10% within 10 days of RTM approval. There will be no state or local conveyance taxes since it's the town purchasing the property, and we do hope for a closing, assuming all the town bodies approve this by November 14th. Other terms, obviously, lots of town approvals are required. I'll get to that in a minute. Environmental closing deliverables, limited warranty deed, which is typical for properties like this on sale, and then a few other terms which you can read here, but this is the basics in terms of the PSA key terms. As for the appropriation itself, there are a number of expenses that will have a security deposit, environmental work, the appraisal, other reimbursable expenses. All told, that's about $70,000, call it. And when you combine that with the purchase price of $5,130,000, that gets to a total appropriation and bond authorization of $5,200,000. All right, let's wrap up with the approval timeline and just looking ahead for our plans. Lots of eyes are going to be on this transaction. So many different bodies are taking a look and are required to take a look. The Board of Selectmen reported this out with its unanimous approval at their meeting on October 6th. Planning and Zoning met on October 14th, which for what is called a mandatory POCD referral. And what that means is anytime you purchase property, Planning and Zoning has to examine the proposed purchase and ensure that it is consistent with the town's plan of conservation and development. They agreed unanimously that it did at their meeting on October 14th. The RTM committee for PZ&H, they met on October 16th to discuss this, and it also had their unanimous approval. We've got a few other groups that need to meet. This week, the Board of Finance will be meeting to consider this. We've got two more RTM committees, Public Works and Finance and Budget, which will also meet this week, followed the following week by full approval and appropriation, hopefully, of the representative town meeting on Monday, October 27th. We are going to have a public hearing on October 30th, and the reason for that is we have to change our parking regulations to incorporate this lot into the town parking lots. So there will be a hearing to discuss that and hear from anyone about that on October 30th. November 7th will be the effective date of the RTM appropriation. We always have to wait 10 days for that to be approved. And then finally, looking for a tentative closing on November 14th. Okay, so as I mentioned, 3 of these are done, the Board of Selectmen, Planning and Zoning, and PZ&H, and we'll hopefully get more of those groups approving this week. So finally, in terms of near and medium term, so very near term, once we acquire the property, we are going to continue to operate it exactly as it is right now, at least through the end of the year. Bob DeRoma, the parking attendant, he's agreed to stay on to help us as long as needed. So that's good news, but it just means that we don't have to take immediate control and start to manage it directly. We've got some time to sort this out and make sure that's a smooth process. We're also not going to make any immediate price changes. The family is not taking any monthly or quarterly payments right now, just while the town sorts everything out. But we don't plan to do anything with regard to pricing, at least through the end of the year. Further, all commuters will remain eligible for now, whether you're a resident or a non-resident. So not to worry there. We may change that in the future, but at least through the end of the year, anybody who pays will be able to park there. So after the first of the year, we are going to work to integrate the town lot with our other town lot, or the Koons lot with our other town lots. But we'll have some decisions to make. One of them is that the current town commuter lots are all $5 a day. The Koons lot is $10 a day. One question is, do we equalize pricing? Another issue we need to decide soon is, are we going to have parking permits for this lot like we do others? And do we introduce those for this lot? I don't know. We need to have some discussions about those two topics, which we will start on this year. I guess I'll close with this quote that was sent to me by our town council, and it reads as follows. I also found old correspondence in old P&Z files indicating that the first selectman and planning administrator attempted to negotiate a purchase of this lot on behalf of the town in 1971, and earlier records in the 1960s wherein town officials recognize the importance of keeping this parcel as a parking lot. So the fact is there's been strategic interest in the Koons Lot for many decades. And now that the family's decided to sell it, the town of Darien has a chance to acquire it. I strongly recommend approval of this acquisition. And I hope this has answered your questions. But again, if you have further questions, I would be happy to answer them. But let's see if we can get this lot acquired so that we can keep it in the town family and keep control over decisions about how we will use it in the future. Thanks for your attention and have a great day. Thank you.